Howdy folks, this is Just Joe at Metcalf Mills. Today we're at one of my most favorite places, Mingus Mill in the Great Smoky Mountains on the Cherokee Reservation. I'm looking forward to sharing it with you. Let's go. Mingus Mill, a 1886 turbine mill. For over 50 years, the mill you are approaching ground corn into meal and wheat into flour for the mountain community near Mingus Creek. In place of a wooden water wheel, a small steel turbine provided power to run the millstones and machinery. Rehabilitated by the National Park Service in 1968, the mill operates during the summer as a historical exhibit. And that's one of the old millers that run this mill. This right here is showing you how a turbine works. You got the flume coming down, you got a penstock that holds the water, and you got the forebay comes down to the turbine to provide the power for the main shaft and the pulley to run the equipment. And that's what the inside of a turbine looks like. Different way to use water power.
There's photo shoot down there. Can I do that?
Well, yeah, we can go across the bridge. We're going right now. Go on, go across the bridge. Mingus Creek that powers this water mill. Yeah, Shar.
Why can't we run the water?
We gotta go up here and see this water mill. Nobody, that's a water mill where they grind corn.
What about him?
He just runs it. There's the flume coming down. We'll look at that in a few minutes. Right here's the initials of the millwright that built the mill. Signed Thomas Early. I think they built this mill in 3 months' time for $600, if I remember right.
Isaiah, did you hear that? They make flour and cornmeal. Come on. They both have their own stuff.
Right here's the penstock that holds the water for the turbine.
Pops, can we go
This is the bin where somebody would bring their grain in and dump it into. And they've got a little gate over here that they can raise up to allow the grain to flow out into the elevator to be carried to wherever, upstairs, wherever they needed to go. Pretty dark in here, I hope you can see. This is the driver on the end of the millstone shaft.
Got any questions about the wheel? I'll be glad to answer for you.
Thank you, buddy. Where's the light switch?
I'm still looking for it.
It's another bin that you can't see. It's a little dark, but right here you can see the latch they've got, how it works. It's real simple, just to raise and lower the gate to open this up for the elevator. There's one of the buckets on the elevator, the cups. This is the bellows used to raise the millstones. These two pins go in holes in each side of the millstone. This handle up here with the thread is turned to raise the millstones up and swing them around. This wooden lever right here, and these little, it's got kind of a gear pattern down here of cogs, and you can pull that lever over, and they had put a wooden wedge in behind it to hold tension on it. And what that done was engage the main pulley underneath the hearse frame to start driving the mill, make everything work. This is a grain bin, probably to hold wheat and corn, one on each side there where them doors are, and they'd probably what they used to store grain, where they'd take it out and mill it for you and sell you a product. Here is the millstone crane, and the way it works, it's got an arm that goes over there where I showed you that threads them in to go, and the thing swivels on the top and the bottom. It's rounded, and it's got a pocket up at the top, and it's got a pocket down on the floor, and it turns in that pocket. And that's how you swing the millstones around side to side. This is the stencil for the bags where they would sell the flour. They would stencil the bag with their name. John Jones operated Mingus Mill on the lease in the late 1930s after the restoration work was completed. The mill closed in the early 1940s and did not operate again until the late 1960s. In the photograph, Mr. Jones is standing next to the hand-operated hoist used to lift the millstones. Millwright's initials. The initials of Cy Thomas Early, the millwright responsible for the construction of Mingus Mill, can be seen above the third floor window on the front of the mill. Aiden Carver was born about 1844 near the National Park's present-day Smoky Mountains campground. After the Civil War, he moved to Tennessee and became a millwright and eventually assisted with the construction of Mingus Mill in 1886. 50 years later, while in his 90s, he worked with the Civilian Conservation Corps and assisted in the restoration of Mingus Mill. In the photograph, Mr. Carver is standing behind the water-driven turbine wheel or runner that provided the power for the turbine. Turbine. A water-driven turbine provided the power for Mingus Mill. The first true turbines were developed in the 1820s and were in widespread use by the time Mingus Mill was built in 1886. Turbines were more efficient than water wheels and could often continue to operate when low water levels would shut down the operation of a water wheel-powered mill. Power for the mill is generated by water under contained and constant pressure striking the blades or vanes of the turbine wheel or runner. Power is provided to various parts of the mill through a series of shafts and belts and pulleys. The turbine in Mingus Mill can develop almost 11 horsepower at about 400 RPMs. Mingus Mill restoration. In 1937, Mingus Mill was one of the first buildings restored as a historic structure in the newly created Great Smoky Mountains National Park. The labor for the restoration work was provided by the Civilian Conservation Corps, a Depression-era public works program. Mingus Mill is one of more than 80 buildings maintained as historic structures by Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Mingus Mill, early 1900s. In the early 1900s, Mingus Mill was still an operating grist mill grinding corn and wheat for families in the surrounding area. The mill continued to operate until about 1930, when the land, along with the mill, was bought for inclusion in the newly created Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Char, Virginia, come here, let's go upstairs. Virginia. Hey, Virginia. Virginia, let's go upstairs. I've got a gate here. I guess the miller would close that to keep anybody from going upstairs when he was working. Now look at this flooring in this thing. It's better than an inch thick, and it's tongue and grooved. They've tongue and grooved it by hand. That ensured there wouldn't be no dust or trash of any kind falling downstairs in the where there's milling. Square-headed nails for the floor. It's a door to go outside. These latches. Simple slide latch. Thomas Early, millwright. Signed Thomas Early, a native of Virginia, moved to Sevier County, Tennessee in 1872 while serving an apprenticeship with another millwright. In 1886, Early was hired to build a mill near the mouth of Mingus Creek. The mill was built in 3 months at a cost of $600. Early's initials can be seen on the front of the mill just beneath the gable of the roof. Third floor machinery. Machinery, gears, belts, and pulleys located on the third floor of the mill made it possible for the turbine to provide power for other parts of the mill operation like the bolting chest and the wheat cleaner. An iron drive shaft powered by the turbine extended vertically through the mill from beneath the first floor all the way to the third floor. The third floor was also at times used for the bulk storage of wheat. The grain was sometimes spread across the floor to a depth of more than a foot. Latch pin joints. Looks like poplar lumber on this bolting cabinet. Steel shaft just running on the wood there. Some kind of a piece of wood there. I don't know what it is that they would made these to run on. Whatever it is, it must have been awful good to last as long as it has. Now you see this big reel up here? That was wrapped with silk bolting cloth. I've always admired the construction of this mill. It's just beautiful. So after the wheat was ground downstairs, it was brought up here by these elevators that I was telling you about right here that come up, and it was deposited into this bolting cabinet with these two chutes, and the product would go inside of the reels, and the bolting silk that was covering these reels all the way around, as it turned, it would beat the whole wheat flour. It would beat it out of these bolting cloths, and it would fall down in the bottom of this big bolting cabinet. This thing's probably 20 foot long. This was a single process bolting, and the product, the finest flour they could get through the silks, come out these spouts on the bottom. And I know it was a single process because downstairs, all three of the outlets, wooden spouts coming through the floor, go into the same single spout. So I don't know how many that tells me that there was one product coming out of this bolting chest, one size of bolting silk cloth in here that sifted out only the finest flour, and everything else would go out the end on the bran chute. So that's where it was important to have real sharp millstones to get as much fine flour as you could out of your wheat. I should know. And this machine had two reels, so it done the same process in unison on both sides. You can see how massive this machine is. It's huge. It's probably 18, 20 foot long. It's huge. These big beams. Let's see. Now this machine is a wheat scour, and that first bin I showed you in that elevator, they'd dump their wheat in there, and the elevator would carry it up to this machine, and it would clean the smut off of it, any trash that was in it, clean it out, and the wheat would come out of this machine and go downstairs into the hopper on the millstones. You can see right up here how they done this notch on this. It's a mortise and tenon with wooden pegs holding it together, But the notch has they've cut a little notch into the post, and the beam is cut on an angle, so it's got a little rest there. And that's to make it stronger and hold up more. Right here you can see they made a set of hinges out of 2 horseshoes. I always liked how they done that.
I'm gonna go down and look at the structure underneath. I enjoy talking.
Now right here's what I was telling you. These spouts come out of the bottom of the flare bolter upstairs, and all 3 sections comes into one spout. And that fine flare over that whole big length of that boulder comes down into one spout right here. This was all flare. It all come into the same spout. And this paddle system is how they opened the gate when they wanted to fill a sack up. Now on this side, it looks like there was 2 different grades because you got 2 different spouts. The first 2 processes comes into one spout, and the last process comes into another one. So they might have had a different grade coming out of that.
Sure, you're taking pictures.
Let's walk up here, Char. Now to keep anybody from climbing up here and opening this gate, they had a system of ladder rungs that would fit in here and fall down and lock in, and they could take them in and lock them up so nobody couldn't climb up there without the rungs. I guess you could, it'd be a little hard to do, but I'd keep most people off of it. One of the reasons this is one of my favorite mills ever. It's the way everything's set up here. We've got this wood line flume. Comes from way up the creek. All the way down. And it turns into the main trough flume right here. hole right there, that is where the smudder from upstairs blowed out the trash from cleaning the wheat. There was an outlet there where it would just blow it out. They covered it up in time. Where the water goes when it ain't going to the turbine. Keeps the flume wet all the time so it won't rot. This pin stock, you can see how it's made. 2x, looks like it's 2x8s or 2x7s, just log cabin fashion, back and forth, all the way up. And when that gets full of water, you imagine how much pressure there is from top to bottom. All that water pushing down, pushing through the steel pipe down to the turbine. Steel pipe comes through. Right here is the turbine, and the main drive shaft off of that comes out the top right here. Water exits out the bottom of it. Main shaft goes up to power all the machinery for the mill. The miller upstairs told us that they was working on it. The bearings went bad in the turbine, he said. I don't know if you can see, but up here is the main drive pulley. That lever I showed you upstairs moves the idler pulley over to put tension on the belt to cause the machinery to run. As you can see, foundation sitting on a pile of rocks, like a lot of the old buildings was. Now this is interesting. They've notched this big seal. It's hewed with an axe, big old seal. They've notched it out, and part of the floor joist goes back in the seal. Talk about a big peg, look at that. Mortise and tenon joint, and there's a big peg there. That's been replaced at some time. It's not original, I can tell by looking at it. See this big post right here? It's got dirt against the bottom of it. It's causing it to rot, and it's sitting on a rock over here. See, originally that would have all been kept clean. There wouldn't have been a speck of dirt around this post. A lot of these old buildings, they ain't took care of like they should be, and that's what leads to their downfall. A lot of people just don't know, or just don't care, or a combination of both. I always admired this timber laying in the creek, and all these upright posts set on top of this timber. Now that's pieced right here. See, that's two different timbers right there. I always admired how they just laid that big timber right in the creek. I guess their thinking was that timber would stay soaked with water, and if something's soaked with water, it won't rot. And if the post just went down into the creek bed, they're going to rot off because half of them's out of the water and half of them's in the water. Over time, this creek's probably changed a lot, and when the turbine was being used all the time, it kept the seal wet all the time. Here's that same joint as upstairs, notched in. Rot. It's just one of my favorite places in the world right here. Ain't another place like it. It's a treasure. Now in the olden days, when this mill in the 30s, when was his name, John Jones, was running it, this right here would have been the main road coming up here. Main road coming up to the mill. If you ever get a chance to visit Mingus Mill, you ought to do it. There's not another place like it that I've ever seen. In the Smoky Mountains, this right here is what they call a elk jam. When you get some elk out on the highway and they cause you a traffic jam. That's how you break up an elk jam in the Smoky Mountains with a paintball gun. Coming out of Maggie Valley up over Soko Gap to go down to Cherokee, there's a little lookout spot on the right hand side of the road. And you can see right here, I'll show you. That is the roller coaster up at Ghost Town in the Sky. And I rode that roller coaster when I was about 12 or 13 years old. It was called the Red Devil then. Somebody's painted it white since then. I think they tried to open Ghost Town back up, but it didn't go nowhere. You can see right there in that clearing going up, that's where they had a chairlift and a train, a rail train, that went up to carry people up to Ghost Town in the Sky. Little old Wild West town up on top of the mountain, had rides, swings, roller coaster, all kinds of fun stuff. I guess it's long gone like a lot of other things, but pretty views over here in the Smoky Mountains. Folks, I hope you enjoyed this visit to the Mingus Mill in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park down in Cherokee, North Carolina. I tell you, that's one of my favorite places. I love mills, and I just love how that mill sets back up in the mountains like that, and just how neat the work is and the history of it. I just love it. It's one of my most favorite places, and I hope you've enjoyed seeing it. And if you've never been there to it, I hope one of these days you can make it to go see it in person, because it's a whole lot better than what you see right here. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed it. Like this video if you will, subscribe to my channel, tell your friends about me, talk about that old history stuff, don't let it die. This is Justro at Metcalf Mills. I look forward to seeing you next time.